You know, one of the biggest struggles people face when trying to learn English is understanding spoken language. You might know the words when you read them, you might even write a few sentences, but when someone speaks fast, suddenly everything feels like a blur. That's where graded stories come in, and they're honestly a game changer. Graded stories are written specifically for learners at different levels, so you're not thrown into the deep end. You don't start with a fast-paced movie or a podcast meant for native speakers. Instead, you take it one step at a time. The vocabulary, sentence structure, and speaking pace are designed with you in mind. You're not expected to understand everything at once. You're guided, you're supported. And the best part, you're learning without the pressure of getting everything right. Imagine this. Instead of listening to a news report filled with jargon, you're following a simple story about a girl who lost her cat and the adventure that follows. It sounds easy, and it is. But that's the point. Because it's within reach, your brain starts to relax. You're not tense. You're not translating every word in your head. You're just listening, and gradually you start to recognize patterns. You hear the same word again and again in different contexts, and suddenly it becomes familiar. It sticks. This kind of learning is natural. It's how children learn language, by hearing words used in stories, in situations, in emotion. You're not memorizing grammar rules. You're living the language through story, and every time you hear a graded story, you're reinforcing those listening muscles. You're training your brain to pick up sounds, to connect them to meaning, and to do it without panic or pause. That kind of immersion, even for just 10 minutes a day, adds up. Slowly, surely, you begin to follow more. You stop rewinding the audio so much. Your understanding becomes smoother, more automatic, and here's the thing, there's no overwhelm. That's what makes graded stories so effective. You're not trying to sound like a native speaker in one day. You're not drowning in complicated vocabulary or idioms that make no sense. You're simply taking the next step that matches your current ability. And that's how real growth happens. You start to feel more confident. When you listen and you actually understand, it feels amazing. It's like opening a door that was locked for a long time. You don't need subtitles. You're not lost. You're present. You're engaged. That feeling motivates you to keep going, to listen to another story and then another. And each one builds on the last, expanding your vocabulary naturally, reinforcing grammar in a way that's subtle and intuitive. You might not even realize how much you're learning, because it doesn't feel like studying. It feels like watching something interesting, like following a character's journey. And while you're doing that, you're improving. That's the beauty of it. You're getting better without burning out, without stress, and it works for all ages. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just someone who wants to speak better English, this method meets you where you are. No judgment, no unrealistic expectations, just progress one story at a time. Because when learning is enjoyable, we stick with it. We come back to it, and that's the only way any real improvement happens. So if you're struggling to improve your English listening, don't jump into material that's way too hard. Don't frustrate yourself trying to catch every word in a fast conversation. Start with a graded story. Just one. Listen, let yourself understand, then listen again. That's how you build confidence. That's how you build fluency. And the truth is, you're not just learning English. You're learning how to learn. You're training your brain to absorb language in a way that's efficient, enjoyable, and sustainable. Because that's what it takes. Small, steady steps with the right tools. And in the world of English learning, graded stories are one of the most powerful tools you can use. That's how the real journey begins. Every day, millions of people try to expand their English vocabulary by studying long word lists. They sit with a notebook, writing down meanings, repeating words again and again, hoping they'll remember them when it matters. But here's the truth. Memorizing words in isolation doesn't lead to fluency. It might help you recognize a word in a test, but when it comes to understanding or using that word in real life, things often fall apart. That's because vocabulary without context is just noise. It doesn't stick. It doesn't live in your memory the same way a word used in a meaningful sentence does. Now think about how you learned your first language. You didn't memorize a dictionary. You didn't write word translations. You heard words used in situations. Someone pointed to a cat and said cat. Someone gave you food and said eat. That's how we naturally learn language, through context. And that's why exposing yourself to English stories, conversations, and dialogues every day is far more powerful than trying to memorize 100 words at once. When you hear a word used in a sentence, surrounded by emotion or action, your brain attaches it to something real. Let's say you hear a story where a character is exhausted after climbing a mountain. That word, exhausted, comes with an image, a feeling, a situation. You don't just learn that it means very tired. You feel it. And because of that, you remember it, not just for the day, but for the long term. This is how daily exposure helps you build fluency. When you listen to English stories regularly, you're not just hearing the words, you're seeing how they're used. You begin to notice which words go together. You see how a verb changes when it's in past tense. You pick up phrasal verbs and expressions that would make no sense if you just looked them up on their own. Bit by bit, without even realizing it, you're internalizing grammar rules, sentence structure, and vocabulary all at once. And what's even better, the pressure is gone. There's no exam. There's no race. You're just absorbing language in a natural, enjoyable way. One day, you're listening to a story about a boy who finds a dog in the rain. The next day, you're listening to a dialogue between two friends planning a trip. And every single time, you're picking up new words in the flow of real language. That's what builds true fluency. Not forced memorization, but consistent exposure. Some learners worry that listening to stories won't give them enough new words. But here's what really happens. When you listen to English daily, even for just 10 minutes, your brain starts to hear certain words repeatedly. At first, you might not catch everything, but then 2 or 3 days later, that same word appears again. And suddenly it clicks, that repetition in context. That's what makes the word yours. You understand it, you trust it, and eventually you can use it. The most fluent English speakers aren't the ones who studied the most words. They're the ones who heard the same words used again and again in meaningful ways. Fluency is not about knowing every word. It's about knowing enough words well and being able to use them comfortably in conversation. And the best way to get there is through stories that make you feel something, situations that mirror real life, and vocabulary that comes alive. Daily exposure also does something subtle but powerful. It changes the way you think in English. You stop translating from your native language. You stop second guessing your grammar. You just understand. You hear a phrase and you know what it means. You respond automatically. That's real fluency. And it only comes with regular, meaningful contact with the language. So instead of pushing yourself to memorize 20 new words tonight, listen to a short English story. Let the words come to you in context. Don't stress about remembering everything. Let your brain do the work quietly, naturally in the background, and do the same tomorrow and the next day, because it's not about learning everything in one sitting. It's about showing up daily and letting the language grow inside you. That's how fluency is built, not through memorization, but through meaningful exposure. One story, one sentence, one word at a time. When we talk about learning English, most people immediately think of grammar rules, vocabulary lists, and textbook exercises. And yes, those have their place, but there's something far more powerful, far more natural, something that often gets overlooked: listening to real, flowing English, not robotic, classroom English, not slow, overly artificial recordings, but English the way it's actually used, rich with tone, rhythm, pauses, and emotion. And the most effective way to tune your ear to this natural flow is by listening to stories. Stories are more than just entertainment. They're alive, they carry meaning, emotion, and human connection. And when you listen to them, you're not just hearing words. You're absorbing the way those words rise and fall, how sentences stretch and pause, where emphasis is placed, and how emotion is layered into speech. That's rhythm, that's tone, that's what helps you go beyond just knowing English to actually understanding it in real-time conversations. Natural English isn't spoken word by word, it's spoken in waves. People connect words, they blend them, they drop sounds, they change tone based on feeling. And if you've only learned from written materials or slowed down lessons, this can be incredibly hard to follow. But when you listen to stories regularly, you begin to catch the music of the language. You start to expect certain patterns. Your brain becomes trained to hear English as it's actually spoken, not as it appears on a page. Let's take a simple phrase like "what are you going to do?" In writing, it's clear, but in speech, you might hear it as "what you gonna do?" If you've only ever read it, you might not even recognize it when spoken quickly. But if you've heard it in a story, in a moment where a character is faced with a decision, it makes sense. The tone, the urgency, the emotion, all of that helps the meaning sink in. That's why listening to stories is such a powerful tool. It gives you repeated, natural exposure to how English really sounds in the real world. And it's not just about understanding words. It's about feeling the sentence structure, knowing where a sentence begins, where it ends. Recognizing the difference between a question and a statement just by the rise or fall in tone. These are things you can't learn from a textbook. You learn them by hearing them again and again in context. In motion, think about music. You can't learn rhythm by reading about it. You have to listen to it. Let your ear feel the beat, the flow. English is the same. When you listen to a story, especially one told with expression, you're training your ear to pick up those subtle cues. The sigh in a character's voice, the excitement in their tone, the sarcasm, the sadness, the surprise. All of that is part of real communication. All of that gives depth to language and helps you not just hear English, but truly understand it. And the more stories you listen to, the more fluent your listening becomes. At first, you might need subtitles. You might pause and replay. That's normal. But over time, your brain adjusts. It begins to process speech faster. It catches sounds it used to miss. You begin to understand full ideas, not just individual words, and you start to think in English because you're hearing it in complete, natural forms. That's why daily listening matters. It's not about one long session once a week. It's about short, consistent moments every day, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, a story while you commute, a dialogue before bed. These moments add up. They build your ear, your brain, your instinct, and when someone speaks to you in English, you're ready, not because you memorized a phrase, but because you've heard it, lived it, felt it in 100 different ways. This is how real listening comprehension grows, not through force, but through familiarity, not by breaking English apart, but by hearing it as a living, flowing language, and the most natural, enjoyable way to do that is through stories. Because stories don't just teach, they connect, they bring language to life, and they train your ear in a way that nothing else can. That's how you stop just learning English and start understanding it. Confidence in understanding English doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, through repetition and exposure. especially when you're listening regularly. In the beginning, it might feel like you're not making much progress. You listen to a story and maybe you only understand a few sentences. Some parts go by too fast. Some words are unfamiliar, and it's easy to think this isn't working. But something powerful is happening behind the scenes. Your brain is absorbing. It's learning patterns, recognizing sounds, getting familiar with the rhythm of English. And the more you listen, the more all of that starts to come together, without you even realizing it. You wake up one day and suddenly you're catching full sentences. You're not translating every word in your head. You're not pausing the audio as much. You're just listening and understanding. That's what daily listening does. It builds your comprehension naturally, without stress, without force. You don't need to focus on every single rule or try to memorize every detail. You simply need to listen often and let your brain do what it's built to do, adapt. There's something freeing about this kind of learning. You're not chasing perfection. You're not being tested. You're just showing up, pressing play, and letting yourself enjoy the story. And that enjoyment is what makes the difference. Because when something is interesting, when it holds your attention, your mind stays open, you remember more, you absorb more, you start to feel more connected to the language, and that connection, that's where confidence is born. It's a subtle shift at first. Maybe you begin finishing sentences in your head before the speaker does. Maybe you notice a phrase you've heard before and suddenly it has meaning. Maybe you're not scared to hear fast English anymore because your ear is getting used to it. All of these small wins matter. They add up, and over time, they become something big, something that changes the way you think about yourself as an English learner. You no longer feel like someone on the outside looking in. You feel like someone who belongs in the conversation, someone who understands, someone who's capable, and that confidence spills into everything. You're more willing to speak. You're not afraid to make mistakes. You're not frozen when someone talks to you in English because you've trained your ear. You've done the work, and it's showing. Even if you didn't notice it happening in the moment, that's the beauty of it. The progress is quiet, but it's real. It's like learning to swim by getting into the water every day. At first, you're unsure. You hold onto the edge, but the more time you spend in the water, the more natural it feels. Eventually, you're moving with ease, and you don't even remember the moment it stopped being scary. That's exactly what happens with listening. You go from struggling to keep up, to floating with the language, to moving confidently through it. And all of this comes without forcing yourself to sit and study for hours. It comes from making listening a part of your daily life, a story while you cook, a dialogue during a walk, an audiobook before bed. These simple moments, repeated every day, train your brain. They build a foundation so strong that understanding becomes instinct. You don't need to try so hard anymore, because it starts to come naturally. And when comprehension becomes natural, confidence follows. You feel calm when you hear English. You know you'll understand the general meaning, even if a few words are new. You stop panicking. You stop avoiding. You start engaging. That's when you truly begin to grow, not just in skill, but in belief that you can do this, that English isn't out of reach, that you're not behind, that you're already on the path. Because every minute you listen, you're training, you're moving forward, you're becoming more fluent. Even if it doesn't feel like it yet, just keep listening, keep showing up, the growth is happening. The confidence is building, and one day you'll hear yourself understand, and you'll know you're there. That's how real comprehension is built, not through pressure, but through presence. There's something about stories that makes them unforgettable. You might forget a list of words you studied last week, but a story you heard just one, especially one that made you feel something, can stay with you for years. That's the magic of storytelling. It isn't just entertainment. It's one of the most powerful tools for memory, especially when learning a language, because when words are wrapped in a story, they're no longer random. They have context, they have emotion, and that makes them easier to remember and, more importantly, easier to use in real life conversations. Think about it. If someone gives you the word anxious and tells you it means nervous, you might remember it for a few minutes. But if you hear a story about a boy waiting to get his exam results, walking back and forth, biting his nails, heart racing, and the narrator says he felt anxious, now that word is tied to a scene, to a feeling, to a person. It's alive, and because of that, you're far more likely to remember it. That's what happens when you listen to stories regularly. Every word you hear is connected to action. It's connected to emotion. You're not just memorizing vocabulary. You're experiencing it. Your brain stores that experience in a deeper way because it recognizes meaning. It recognizes relevance. It doesn't feel like study. It feels like life. And here's where it gets even better. When a word is stored with context, your brain knows how to use it. You don't just recall the meaning. You recall the way it was said, when it was said, and how it was used. So when you're in a conversation and a similar situation comes up, your brain retrieves that memory. The word surfaces. You say it without overthinking. That's real language learning, not just knowing words, but using them naturally with ease and confidence. There's also a rhythm to stories that makes learning smoother. You hear words repeated in slightly different ways. One character says, "I'm exhausted." Later, another says, "You look tired." That repetition with variation reinforces meaning. It shows you different ways of expressing similar ideas, and every time you hear it in a new voice, a new scene, a new emotion, it becomes more and more familiar. That's why stories work better than flashcards. Flashcards are static. They show you a word and a translation, no voice, no feeling, no story, but language is not static. It moves, it breathes, it lives inside conversations, moments, relationships. And that's what stories give you. They bring words to life, and once something has life in your mind, it's hard to forget. Even simple stories can have a deep impact. A tale about a lost dog, a short conversation between two strangers on a train, a funny situation at a market. These are the moments that reflect real life, and because they're relatable, they stay with you. The words used in those moments, common, useful, everyday words, become part of your memory in a natural, lasting way. And it's not just about understanding. It's about reuse. The more you listen to stories, the more you start to speak like the stories. You remember how someone expressed surprise, or how a character asked for help, or how they described their feelings. These expressions start slipping into your own conversations. You're not just speaking English. You're speaking it with rhythm, with tone, with the kind of vocabulary that makes you sound more fluent. This is what daily listening to stories does. It doesn't just teach, it transforms. It gives you words that don't just sit in your brain, but come to your lips when you need them. It gives you language that feels natural because you've heard it in context, in motion, in emotion. That's what makes it powerful. You might not realize it after one story, but listen every day, stay consistent, let the language wash over you, and soon you'll find that you're remembering more than you thought. You're speaking more confidently, you're understanding faster, all because the stories you heard stayed with you and brought the words along with them. That's how words become part of you, not through force, but through feeling. One of the most frustrating parts of learning English, or any language, is not knowing where to start. Sometimes the material feels way too simple, like you're being talked down to. Other times it's overwhelming, full of fast speech or difficult words that make you feel like giving up. That's why graded content matters so much. It gives you exactly what you need for where you are right now. Not too easy, not too hard, just effective. Graded content is carefully written and spoken with learners in mind. It's designed to match your current level, helping you stretch your understanding without snapping your confidence. And that balance is everything. Because if learning feels too difficult, you lose motivation. You feel stuck, but if it's too simple, you're not really learning anything new. You're just coasting. What you need is that sweet spot in between, where things are just challenging enough to help you grow without making you feel lost. Imagine listening to a story that's slightly above your current comfort zone. It's not impossible to follow, but it makes you focus. You hear some familiar words and some new ones. The pace is steady, the structure is clear, and the message is understandable with a bit of effort. That's graded content doing its job. It's not pushing you into confusion. It's guiding you through discovery. That's when real learning happens. It's also incredibly motivating. When you complete a story or conversation that's been written for your level, you feel successful. You didn't need a dictionary for every line. You didn't quit halfway. You made it through, and that sense of accomplishment gives you energy to keep going. That's something you don't get when the material is too advanced and just leaves you frustrated. And it's not just about vocabulary or grammar. Graded content also helps you get used to sentence rhythm, word combinations, and how native speakers actually talk, without all the speed or slang that can make understanding so hard in the beginning. It introduces these things gradually, so you're not shocked by real English, but gently brought into it. Step by step, you get more confident. The beauty of this kind of learning is that you don't even realize how much progress you're making until one day. A word or phrase you learned in a level 2 story suddenly shows up in a movie or a real life conversation, and you understand it instantly. That's the moment you realize it's working, you're growing. Graded content also saves time. You're not wasting energy trying to decode things that are way beyond your level. Instead, every minute of your listening or reading time is productive. You're getting exposure to real language that's been adjusted just enough to help you learn it well. No stress, no pressure, just smart, focused learning. And as you move from one level to the next, you start noticing how your brain adapts. You can follow more complex sentence structures. You catch subtle changes in tone. You pick up new vocabulary and start using it without needing to look it up again. That kind of growth feels good. It reminds you that fluency isn't built overnight. It's built through consistent steps in the right direction. The more time you spend with the right level of content, the stronger your foundation becomes. You stop second guessing yourself. You begin to trust your instincts when listening or speaking, and all of that confidence adds up over time. Suddenly, you're not just a learner anymore. You're a communicator. And that's the goal. So instead of trying to jump into something too advanced just to feel like you're improving, give yourself permission to grow at your own pace. Graded content isn't easy content, it's smart content. It's been designed to help you get better, faster, and with less frustration. It meets you where you are and walks with you until you're ready for more. That's how real progress is made. Not by rushing, but by choosing the right challenge at the right time. Thank you for joining this journey of learning through stories, where every word, every moment brings you closer to real confidence and fluency. Keep listening daily, stay consistent, and let English grow with you, one story at a time.